Forget romance and roses, Spartan marriage looked more like a covert operation than a love story. With midnight snatchings, shaved brides, and military-approved matchmaking, this wasn't wedding season, it was warrior breeding season. Backed by ancient sources like Plutarch and Xenophon, what you're about to hear isn't fiction. It's real, raw, and absolutely wild. Welcome to the coldest love life in history. Buckle up. It's about to get seriously strange. In ancient Sparta, marriage looked less like a love story and more like a weird training drill from a boot camp. According to Plutarch's Life of Lycurgus, Spartan weddings didn't come with flowers, cake, or slow dancing. Instead, they kicked off with what looked like a kidnapping. The groom didn't walk up to the bride and gently take her hand. He snatched her in the middle of the night like he was doing some covert mission. It was all planned, of course, but still, it had the vibe of a high-stakes prank gone serious. Now, the truly strange part came after the so-called abduction. The bride wasn't dolled up in a flowing dress or covered in flowers. Nope. Her head was shaved, and she was dressed like a man. That's right. On her wedding night, the bride was made to look like one of the boys from the barracks. This wasn't a fashion trend or some dramatic Spartan makeover. It had a purpose. A very Spartan one. Spartan men were raised in military camps since childhood. They ate, slept, fought, and trained with other boys day and night. They didn't grow up flirting or writing love poems. They grew up learning how to stab someone with a spear before breakfast. So when it was time to settle down and get cozy with a woman, suddenly, it wasn't exactly smooth. The makeover was meant to soften the shock. Shave her head, throw her in a man's tunic, keep the lights off, and ease the guy into marriage like it was another training drill. And speaking of lights, there were none. There was no feast, no singing, no, "you may now kiss the bride." The groom had to sneak out of his barracks like a naughty schoolboy, meet his wife in silence, do what needed to be done, and sneak back before sunrise. They kept this routine for months, sometimes even years. No living together, no cuddles, no morning chats. Spartans didn't do hand-holding or sweet nothings. Their emotional temperature hovered somewhere between ice cube and granite. Love wasn't part of the plan. Duty was. Marriage was just another step in producing the next generation of perfect soldiers. And if it felt a little cold, well, that was exactly how Sparta liked it. This whole setup wasn't a fluke. It was by design. The point wasn't love or even companionship. It was all about producing strong babies. The Spartans treated marriage the same way they treated war. No drama, no nonsense, just results. Their focus was on building the next generation of elite soldiers. Feelings, softness, and sweet nothings had no place in their world. Compared to modern weddings with their overpriced cakes and TikTok-worthy proposals, Spartan marriages were cold, weird, and efficient. But in their harsh world, it made perfect sense. They didn't do romance, they did duty. And if that meant marrying someone who looked like your bunkmate, so be it. In ancient Sparta, love and loyalty took a back seat. What really mattered was producing strong, healthy kids who could fight like warriors. And if that meant sharing your wife with another man, so be it. According to Xenophon's constitution of the Lacedaemonians, the Spartans had a government-approved system that allowed men to basically loan out their wives for breeding purposes. It sounds like reality TV gone wrong, but for them, it was serious business. If a man was older or couldn't have kids, he didn't hold on tight to his wife. Instead, he could invite a younger, fitter Spartan to sleep with her. The goal wasn't pleasure or love, it was all about genetics. They wanted strong babies who could grow into battle-ready citizens. This wasn't done in secret. Everyone knew, and no one flinched. It was like passing the torch, except the torch was your wife and the flame was your family line. Women weren't left out either. In a world where most ancient societies treated them like property, Sparta handed them a bizarre kind of freedom. If a woman came from a strong family and had proven her value, she could have more than one approved partner. All of this was organized, state-backed, and taken as seriously as war plans. It didn't matter what the neighbors in Athens thought. Spartans had one mission: build a tougher next generation. There were no love triangles, no dramatic fights over who slept where. The Spartans didn't have time for drama. The state came before personal feelings. Monogamy was nice in theory, but it didn't help produce elite soldiers, so they replaced it with a cold, calculated system of state-sponsored matchmaking. Think less The Notebook, more military breeding farm. It sounds wild by today's standards, but the Spartans didn't care about public opinion. If modern couples tried this system, social media would explode, therapists would cash in, and DNA tests would break the internet. But for Sparta, it worked. They raised warriors, not romantics. And every part of life, even marriage, was shaped to serve that one goal. In this gritty system, jealousy had no place. Marriage didn't mean exclusivity. It meant duty. If your child came out strong and ready for war, you'd done your part. The Spartans saw love as a luxury, but survival as a must. And if passing your wife to a better gene pool helped keep Sparta strong, they did it with pride and zero shame. In ancient Sparta, staying single wasn't cool, rebellious, or independent. It was considered lazy, selfish, and downright embarrassing. According to Plutarch's Life of Lycurgus, the Spartans had no patience for bachelors. If a man refused to marry or have kids, the state didn't just frown at him, it went full-on public humiliation mode. They treated single men like defective tools that weren't doing their job. And in Sparta, your job was to make more Spartans. Marriage wasn't a personal choice, it was a duty to the state. The whole system was designed to keep the population strong and full of future soldiers. So if you tried to dodge that responsibility, the state made sure you suffered for it. Bachelors were excluded from important festivals. Everyone else got to party, eat, and celebrate, while the single guys were left standing outside like kids grounded during a birthday party. It didn't stop there. These unlucky men were also forced to march naked through the streets during the cold of winter. But not quietly. They had to sing songs mocking themselves for being unmarried. Imagine freezing your toes off while shouting about your lack of a love life, and doing it with a crowd watching and laughing. That was Sparta's idea of motivation. This wasn't just bullying for fun, it was policy. The Spartans knew that without children, their warrior society would collapse. Every man was expected to marry and produce strong sons who could be trained for battle. If you skipped out on that, you were failing your city, your ancestors, and your legacy. The state turned marriage into a requirement. Love didn't matter. Attraction didn't matter. What mattered was keeping the military machine running. There was no privacy in this system. Everyone knew who the bachelors were, and the punishments made sure they never forgot it. The Spartans didn't just rely on guilt, they used public pressure, shame, and social isolation to push every man into doing his part. Marriage wasn't celebrated for romance, it was enforced like a law. Refusing it meant being mocked, frozen, and humiliated in front of your neighbors. Today, people throw bachelor parties and swipe through dating apps like it's a sport. But in Sparta, being single made you a walking joke. They believed that a man's worth came from his contribution to the future of the state. If you weren't making babies, you were wasting space. And if that meant marching naked through the snow with a sad song on your lips, then that was your price for skipping the altar. Ancient Sparta was not your typical ancient Greek city. While other cities like Athens celebrated art, philosophy, and democracy, Sparta built its entire world around one thing: war. Everything in Spartan life, from birth to death, was designed to serve the military. This wasn't a place for dreamers or poets. Sparta was a factory for soldiers. From the moment a child was born, the state took over. Babies were inspected by elders. If a baby looked weak or sick, it was left to die. Harsh, but in Sparta, weakness had no place. Boys who passed the test were raised not by their parents, but by the state. At age 7, they entered the agorge, a brutal training system that turned them into warriors. They learned to fight, steal, suffer, and survive. Pain was part of the lesson. Comfort was the enemy. Spartan boys lived in barracks, shared everything, and were taught to follow orders without question. Friendships were deep, loyalty was everything, and fear was crushed early. By the time they turned 20, they were soldiers. By 30, they could live with their families if they had one. But even then, military duty always came first. Spartan girls had a very different life compared to other Greek women. They didn't stay locked indoors. They trained, ran races, and built strong bodies. The idea was simple. Strong women give birth to strong sons. Women in Sparta were respected, especially if they raised warriors. They couldn't vote, but they had more freedom than any other Greek women. The government in Sparta was a mix of monarchy, oligarchy, and democracy. It had 2 kings, a council of elders, and a small group of elected officials called ephors, who made sure the laws were followed. It wasn't flashy, but it kept things in order. Sparta didn't build grand temples or write epic plays. It didn't care about fame or fortune. It focused on discipline, strength, and control. Everyone had a role, and nobody stepped out of line. Personal desires meant nothing compared to the needs of the state. For centuries, this strict system worked. Sparta produced one of the most feared armies in the ancient world. Even mighty Athens watched its step. But over time, Sparta's refusal to change became its downfall. It stayed rigid while the rest of Greece evolved. Eventually, its numbers fell, its power faded, and its glory became just another chapter in history. In ancient Sparta, family life wasn't warm and cozy. It was cold, strict, and designed to serve the state. According to Plutarch, Spartan children didn't grow up sitting on their parents' laps listening to bedtime stories. Instead, they were raised by the state. From the age of 7, boys were taken from their homes and placed in the agoge, a harsh military training system where discipline, pain, and survival were taught early. Parents didn't have much say. The state had full control. Traditional family bonds were intentionally weakened. Love and attachment were seen as distractions. What mattered most was creating loyal, fearless soldiers. Even paternity became a loose concept. Because of Sparta's wife-sharing customs, a man might raise a child that wasn't biologically his, and that didn't bother anyone. If the child was strong and fit for Sparta, that was all that mattered. Men were encouraged to care more about the state's future than their bloodline. It didn't matter whose DNA the child carried. What mattered was whether he could become a soldier. Biological ties were second to duty. This system made sure that Spartan men raised any child born under the approved eugenic practices without question or pride of ownership. Women, too, were part of this collective mindset. Their job was to give birth to warriors, not build emotional households. The state kept everyone focused on one goal: military dominance. By disconnecting children from traditional family structures, Sparta created a society that valued collective strength over personal love. Everyone belonged to the state, every child was a future weapon, and every adult had a role to play, regardless of biology. It was harsh, strange, and cold, but in the Spartan mindset, loyalty to the state came first, even above your own blood. In ancient Sparta, everyday life was strict, cold, and carefully controlled by the state. There was no space for love stories, romantic letters, or secret crushes. Marriage was arranged, sex was for making strong babies, and daily life followed rules that left little room for personal feelings. But during certain festivals, things changed. These events gave Spartans rare chances to relax, interact, and even flirt just a little, and always with the state's approval. One of the most important of these was the Hyacinthia, described by Herodotus. The Hyacinthia and other festivals were not just about honoring the gods. They became one of the only chances for young Spartan men and women to meet and spend time together. These festivals included music, dancing, and athletic events where both boys and girls took part. Everyone was expected to perform, move well, and look strong. Girls danced in public, sometimes wearing short tunics, while boys wrestled, ran, or played music. These activities were not only for fun. They allowed young people to see each other, get noticed, and start the early steps toward marriage. Unlike the secret and quiet way Spartan marriages began, festivals were loud and open. Boys and girls could see each other in the sunlight, not in a dark room. They laughed, moved together, and shared glances in front of the whole community. It may have looked like fun, but it was still part of the system. The state allowed these moments not for romance, but to encourage strong, healthy matches that could produce strong, healthy children. Attractions formed during these festivals were not just about feelings. They were based on strength, discipline, and health. The state paid close attention to who danced well, who moved with power, and who stood out in the crowd. It was a kind of public matchmaking, where the best were noticed and remembered. Spartan festivals were not wild celebrations. They followed strict rules and served a clear purpose. These events let young people interact just enough to feel seen, but not too much to lose focus. The goal was always the same: to keep Sparta strong. In ancient Sparta, sex wasn't seen as private or sacred. It was treated like a tool, a controlled and carefully managed part of life, meant to serve the state. Unlike other Greek cities where adultery could get someone killed or publicly stoned, Sparta handled sexual misconduct in a much colder, more practical way. Xenophon explained that the focus wasn't on morality or honor, but on discipline and population. If someone broke the rules, the goal wasn't revenge. It was damage control. Adultery in Sparta didn't lead to brutal punishment or bloodshed. Instead, the guilty might face a fine, public humiliation, or even exile. But death was too extreme and far too wasteful. Every citizen mattered in Sparta. Killing someone over a private affair meant losing a potential fighter or breeder, and that simply didn't work in a city built for war. The Spartans cared less about who loved whom, and more about keeping the system running without chaos. What made their punishments strange was the public part. If someone was caught in adultery or inappropriate behavior, they didn't just get punished quietly. They were made into examples. The community would know. Gossip served as both social glue and a political weapon. Spartan shame had sharp edges. Public image meant everything, so humiliation was powerful enough to keep most people in line. Unlike other Greek cities that handed out cruel physical punishments, Sparta stuck with penalties that hit where it hurt: status and pride. A man found guilty might be mocked, pushed out of important social events, or forced to face public ceremonies where his failure was on full display. These punishments didn't destroy the body, but they crushed the spirit. In a place where strength and reputation meant survival, that was worse. Women were also expected to follow strict rules, especially because their role in creating strong children was so important. But even then, if a woman broke the rules, she wasn't immediately cast out. The state wanted babies. The goal was always the same: protect reproduction, not pride. If someone could still contribute to society, they were corrected, not eliminated. Spartan laws around sex didn't come from a place of passion or religion. They came from cold logic. The leaders didn't care about feelings. They cared about numbers, order, and control. Discipline kept Sparta strong, and sexual misconduct was treated like any other crack in the armor. Fix it fast, keep the damage low, and move on. Ancient Sparta turned marriage into a mission and love into a side quest. No flowers, no vows, just duty, discipline, and a whole lot of weird. It was brutal, bold, and built for battle. If this glimpse into Spartan madness made you cringe, laugh, or stare in disbelief, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. There's plenty more where that came from. History's wild side, one strange custom at a time.